Welcome to the Qualitalks podcast, a show about pharma and GMP. The pharmaceutical industry is a fascinating and complex field, and it takes countless people to bring a product to the market. In this podcast, we bring you some of the industry's brightest minds who will share their wisdom with you. And now, please welcome your host, Jan Kugel.
Welcome to our podcast episode focusing on quality assurance in pharmaceutical equipment management. Today we have a special guest joining us, Jennifer Chang, who is currently serving as a QA intelligence specialist at Blue Mountain. With a wealth of experience in quality assurance and compliance, Jennifer brings valuable insights into the realm of digitalization in pharma equipment management. We will be delving into her QA journey, discussing the impact of digital transformation on manufacturing processes and exploring the challenges and benefits of compliance in the pharmaceutical industry. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to be part of this.
Yeah, I'm also excited to have you here. We also did a very interesting webinar together, so I remember all your passion to the topic. And I wanted to start with you by talking about your career path. This is something that I have been discussing with previous guests as well, because I find it very interesting when pharma professionals go and do and implement their skills in the different areas, especially when they're, for example, moving to service providers. So it just shows that working in pharma and quality doesn't mean you always have to stay there. There are so many opportunities. So I'm very eager to hear a bit about your path in pharma, how it started, and how did you move to your current role?
Sure. I could go back as far as my teenage years as a lifeguard if you want at the swimming pool.
If it's
Although,
fascinating, I'm sure that will be nice.
I mean, it could be considered relevant since even at that point, my main function was kind of enforcing preventative measures in the interest of public safety. But my professional career started after I graduated in 2009, and I actually started as a quality technician in a meat processing facility. So this was sort of my first introduction to a regulated environment where I learned a lot about GMPs in general and standard operating procedures and good documentation and labeling practices, as well as kind of the crash course in how demanding the manufacturing world can be. So after I'd been there for a few years, I developed an interest in laboratory testing and microbiology and auditing. So in 2012, I shifted to the kind of parallel world of pharmaceutical manufacturing, where I started as a QC microbiologist in a laboratory. So I quickly took to kind of the more strictly controlled environment that's required to manufacture sterile injectable products. And I really just started soaking in as much information as I could. I love to learn. That's kind of what drives me. And I was a kid in a candy store with all of the different things that I could learn when I got there. The microbiology lab allowed me to really dig deeper into not only the testing and investigations, but to kind of connect that with the applicable industry and regulatory requirements that dictated why, how, and when that kind of testing was done in pharmaceuticals. So from there, from the microbiology lab, I moved into the quality control incoming inspections group as a supervisor, where I became heavily involved in source materials and vendor management and supplier corrective actions, which I also found fascinating. So things like your specifications for every product or component or excipient that comes in, you have to have specifications and determining what is acceptable to use in your product. And also at this time, funnily enough, I was also using Calibration Manager from Blue Mountain, which is the predecessor to the modern Regulatory Asset Manager, the RAM product that Blue Mountain offers today, not realizing that I would come to know the Blue Mountain company much, much better in the future. And since the organization I worked for was over 100 years old at the time, CalMan was only one of a handful of electronic systems that our site had implemented. So we were primarily paper-based. Those systems had been working for a long time since our organization had been around so long. So CalMan was actually one of the first electronic data capture systems that I really had worked intimately with. So after making my way back to the QC microbiology lab as a supervisor, in 2016, I started becoming more involved with electronic systems implementation and administration. So, starting in the laboratory, we had systems for environmental monitoring, personnel monitoring, data capture, particulate monitoring, sample tracking, endotoxin testing, and struggling with kind of dealing with the associated electronic systems taught me a lot about strategies and pitfalls. I learned a lot about what not to do with systems like that and where you can run into roadblocks with things like training and user management. Adversity is a really effective teacher, and I was learning the lessons the hard way. So after I was in that role for a while, I moved to the quality assurance team, which was kind of another parallel move even within the organization. I was still focused on QC processes, so the laboratory, but moving from quality control to quality assurance, it required me to adopt a new perspective on some of the same topics that I dealt with since I started in pharma. So I now had a more active role on the same topics, um, and I had a more active role in defending our processes and decisions in our documents during regulatory and customer audits. And I started to develop a sense for anticipating compliance concerns. I also kind of resumed my role with vendor management, albeit on the quality assurance, kind of that final approval side. It is a different responsibility to be kind of the last signature before we're determining whether or not something's acceptable or needs to be discarded. Um, so I got involved with a lot of initiatives that required QA input. Um, and after a couple of years, my scope within QA further expanded to include all of the manufacturing and support activities. So, kind of at each tier, it would open up a whole new world of things I needed to learn and kind of study and research into, which I really enjoy. But with all that I loved about it, pharmaceutical manufacturing can be grueling. I mean, it's a stressful environment, it's demanding, it's unpredictable, and can be really relentless sometimes. So, at the end of 2022, I decided I needed to find a role that would better suit my needs and my family's needs. So, after a brief stint with some freelance and consulting roles, um, early last year, I came across Blue Mountain's role for QA intelligence specialist. So I actually wasn't looking for a full-time role when I came across it, but I was interested right away. Here was a chance at kind of a unique opportunity for a career pivot that I hadn't considered before. It's almost like the role was created with my exact background in mind. So after pursuing it, and I figured I wasn't too old to transition, to learn, to adopt yet another new perspective amidst another parallel industry with a different yet still related set of best practices and standardized processes, as well as a fascinating interplay of different people and skills and departments and functions that have to coordinate to create a stellar product that's stable. And after meeting the Blue Mountain teams that I would be working with, I knew that Blue Mountain it had the supportive culture and the commitment to quality that would actually allow me to keep learning and improving myself while getting to offer the benefit of my experience in life sciences to improve our customers' experience. So it's been tricky for sure. The world of software has a whole new language to learn, just like life sciences did when I got into that field. So I still have a long way to go. But to me, that's not a dread; it's an excitement. And like I said, I'm excited to have a chance to leverage my past struggles to make things easier for their customers, however we can.
Right, so that's an interesting career path, and I think it's fascinating to see the possibilities out there and to take upon opportunities when they present themselves. Right, so congratulations on that, because I think it's quite fascinating indeed. And before we go a bit more into compliance and what you do and asset management. Can you tell us a bit, in short, what Blue Mountain does, so we have the understanding of what we are talking about here?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So Blue Mountain, it's like I said, the primary offering is regulatory asset manager, which is exactly what it says. So it is managing all of your equipment, your assets, your incubators, your balances, everything that you would need, all of the assets that you need to manufacture product under GMP regulations. So not only will it help manage the maintenance, the calibration events, the scheduling, all of that, it can help with parts. It can help with reporting. You can build workflows for things like periodic reviews. You can set up events, anything that you need to be recurring, you can capture in the system. So we have customers that use it to capture, you can capture cleaning records on those pieces of equipment. And so it's just a repository for all of those types of events that would impact your assets. And it's all right at your fingertips, and you can look at everything related to an asset just pulling up that record. Um, I personally find the audit trail really helpful because you can get to that records audit trail from the main menu of any of the records. So yeah, so that's just the broad overview, but I'm sure there are people that can explain it much better than I can.
No, I think you did it quite well. And just to understand where we stand in terms of the industry, right? So you mentioned that you came from a company that was established, was old, was has been around for quite a while, and we know that such companies uh, they take time to change the way they're doing things to update their system, because sometimes they have established systems that sometimes they even build themselves before suppliers and service providers, software companies came and created something more dynamic. So did you have such a system? So you mentioned that you did work with Blue Mountain there, but did you have the system there with all the models? And also, when you're looking at the new clients that you have, would you say that most of the companies have some software that already manages their resources, or a lot of it is manual?
We get a wide variety of different types of customers, and a surprising amount that are sort of a hybrid model. So it might be, you generate a piece of paper, you print out a piece, a form to complete a calibration, and then that gets transcribed or moved into a different system. We might have customers who came from an older version of the system and they want to upgrade to take to benefit from the newest features. So um, we get a lot of those, a lot of different scenarios that come to us as a customers. And so our job is to try to meet our customers where they're at and figure out the best way to implement it that is most beneficial, most effective, and uh, in the best, like a timely manner, but without being too disruptive to their current process. So it's always trying to strike a balance, and that's why we try to really understand what our customers' biggest struggles are, what their biggest objectives are when we're meeting with them to try to implement.
And what do you find to be the biggest challenges that companies face before they come to you with resource management?
A lot of the challenges, again, it can vary a lot depending on the individual situation. So, a startup company, they might have a lot of people, a lot of really smart people who know their product, but the manufacturing game might be new to them. They might not understand how to manage and schedule all of that. So, they might be leaning on us a little bit more than just the solution. So, that's where somebody like me can come in and kind of help with offering sort of a perspective on compliance when they're trying to configure. Or you might have a company that they're really good at what they do, they understand manufacturing and GMP, but they're going through some growing pains. They might be starting a new facility or a new clean room project, new construction projects. They would have slightly different needs, but they could still. That's where we could still offer insights from what we've learned through different implementations to kind of optimize how they would configure. So the biggest challenge is using solutions that you purchase in the most productive way, in the best way, in the most compliant way, and that's where we can help because we've seen a lot. Blue Mountain, it's not 100 years old, but it's in its 30s. It's 35 years old this year, and they've seen a lot of different scenarios and a lot of growth and changes within the pharmaceutical industry.
Yes, and what are also the biggest challenges of implementations of such systems? Do you find that the validation or the risk assessments, this is the biggest concern of quality, and how do you usually deal with such um, events?
We could hold an entire webinar on the challenges. There are no shortage of those. Um, Again, the biggest challenge is making sure that what you have, like your ultimate output, however it is implemented, that it fits your needs and that your end users understand it and they know how to work with it. So one of the big challenges is having the resources. So a lot of times the same resources, the people that you need to make your product day in and day out, to release it, to test it, to deal with to deal with issues as they pop up. Those resources are the same resources you need to tap into when you're rolling out a new system because they're going to understand what the real world implications are going to be. But it's really hard because those same individuals they have a lot of time constraints. They have a lot of other conflicting priorities. So that's where kind of the management, the executive leadership buy-in, being able to support um, giving those resources enough time, giving them the support they need to be able to think things through as they're rolling out these electronic systems.
And do you work with the clients directly, or you're more involved in the back office of the quality intelligence of the system to make sure that it is up to the standard and up to the GMP regulations?
A little bit of both. I'm not like a primary customer contact. We have an entire team, an implementation team that is there to kind of walk alongside. But I might get called in if there's, say, a specific compliance concern, a question. I kind of love these because they're debates. They're really interesting, and you might have a lot of different perspectives, and none of them are exactly right. So a lot of times, just having the conversation can be really helpful. But that's usually when I get called in. My um, primary duties are just like all of the QA stuff, the audits, document control, training, validation, document review. I'm involved with all of that here, but um, it also, my specific role gives me jurisdiction to kind of track and monitor the ever changing industry and the regulatory enforcement landscape and kind of digest the complex guidance documents and regulations into actionable advice that we can give both internally and to our customers.
Right. So you then responsible to make sure that the system operates within the requirements, right? So you need to keep updated on the latest standards of validation of computerized system and so on, right?
Yeah, I have to kind of keep myself up to date so that I can be offering the most up to date information. I mean, that's the challenge in life sciences is the bar is always being raised, the standard is always to be improving. And that's sort of the price to pay to even be in this business is you have to be you have to approach it with a growth mindset. I'm really fortunate that Blue Mountain does have that mindset. And that's sort of the other piece of what I do is I kind of leverage my knowledge, my experience, and not just in what the regulations are, but in doing things like trying to standardize processes, trying to take information from people who are really knowledgeable, have been in this industry for a long time, and kind of turn that into training materials for a new set of people, a set of young skilled professionals that are coming in, so that you can kind of transfer that knowledge and standardize it as much as possible. So that's where I'm hoping I can help Blue Mountain as well.
So, in terms of your role, you said you always need to keep up to date. So, what are the best practices, if you can share? How do you stay up to date?
Yeah, sure. So the first off is read, watch. There's so many great resources out there. I could fill a book with all of the references and resources. The problem is actually having time to read them. But I happen to enjoy reading and interpreting all of the kind of boring regulatory guidance documents. and try to piece together the kind of the bigger story that's unfolding. Um, I mean, internally, people forget that there's a lot of resources internally. So your own SOPs, your own work instructions, investigations are a gold mine of information, because sometimes the best way to understand a process is to see what happens when it goes wrong. So kind of like the gene knockout studies and genomics research. If you see kind of the output of how things go wrong, what the investigation process was, then you can get a much clearer understanding of why that process is so important and why that process is the way that it is. Um, so yeah, there are a lot of good websites out there that offer free or paid, things like webinars, things like Qualistery, where you can get webinars, you can get perspectives, and even if there's a lot of different information, you're not going to absorb it all. Over time, you'll kind of build your own ideas, and it'll at least get you to think about things, or sometimes point you to a new resource. So really, just read, watch, learn wherever you can. And also, I mean, going along with that too, in terms of finding mentors, find people who are good at things that you're interested in. You know, it's unlikely that one single person will have the time or knowledge to impart everything you need to know. So find multiple people that are skilled or knowledgeable at something you want to learn. Learn what you can from them. Like, I've had different mentors from everything from microbiology to root cause analysis to Microsoft Word or vendor management or electronic systems validation. So by doing this, you can kind of not only shore up your skills, but you're also passively building the network that you can continue to learn from.
Right. So I think this is a very good point, especially with mentors. I think some people are very lucky to get great ones, and sometimes it's a bit difficult to find those. So you manage to uh, find those in your company itself. And speaking of mentors, if somebody wants a mentor, what is your recommendation? How to identify good mentor, people who are open to be a mentor, who are skilled enough, and how to approach them so they become one.
Yeah, it's hard. And I've kind of thought about this the last few days. You don't always realize your mentor is your mentor until it's a little farther down, and sometimes they don't either. I mean, the first time I found myself where I was kind of mentoring someone, I didn't realize it until after a year or two of working with them, and they called me that, and I sort of took a step back. But the way, like, kind of looking back, the way I found a lot of the mentors, the people that have helped me learn and grow along the way, you start by helping them. Volunteer to help with the project, the task that nobody else wants to do. So not only does it just give you a really contextualized, hands-on experience learning something, you're also going to watch that person who is better than you at something. You're going to watch them struggle. You're going to see how they deal with it. Um, and even if I firmly believe that you can learn something from every single person that you meet. Sometimes that lesson is how you don't want to behave or how you don't want to make decisions, but even that is a lesson. So get involved. I mean, that's sort of my biggest piece of advice to somebody really trying to flesh out their knowledge in this industry. Get involved, try to learn what you can, and just sort of follow wherever the information is taking you. If something looks interesting, go read it. If you find something else, go, and even if I don't read it right away, I always have kept a folder of things that are just resources, or if I come across something, I might download it and save it and then go look at it later. Or what would happen is I would end up in a situation where I would then remember, oh, there was this really good article that was about, a root cause analysis, or some kind of microbial issue, and then you could go read it, and then that kind of puts it into context. And for me, that's sort of how I could cement my learning.
And from your current trying to stay up to date with everything, where do you feel that the industry is heading? Do you see changes that are happening, or what are the current trends in uh, let's say with the validation of software, validation of cloud services? Is there anything new there?
There's always something new. But what I'm seeing right now the most is sort of a not a return to pre-COVID, measures. It's more of the enforcement actions. So during COVID, it rocked everything, and that included the FDA, the regulatory bodies. They were struggling to get inspections done. They implemented a lot of tools like the remote inspections. What I'm seeing now is, and then the focus became a lot more on like for enforcement actions, warning letters. You saw a lot more that had to do with COVID treatments that were being mislabeled or misbranded. Whereas now, what I've seen is there's a return to on-site inspections. There's sort of a return to more normal inspections. So you're seeing a lot of the enforcement actions go up. So it's and companies they were also deeply affected by COVID, supply chain, personnel shortages, people like me who decided to pursue other interests, a really knowledgeable set of professionals who are retiring. So what we're struggling with now is trying to bring sort of the young professionals up to speed while trying to deal with some of the fallout of issues that have happened with supply chain, with personnel, things that are really making the manufacturing process harder from the day to day. So that's a struggle. But the message from the regulatory bodies really hasn't changed that much. Overall, what I see time and time again is that they want a holistic, risk-based approach, showing that you understand your process, that your operations are driven by procedures and are in an overall state of control that's designed for a product that is made right the first time. Um, and that's something that we adopt at Blue Mountain too. It's what's expected for our customers, and that's what we're always going to strive for as well.
And where do you feel are the struggles of companies when we are talking about keeping with the uh, regulators and taking the risk-based approach, which is a bit newer, right? So it's something that the FDA strives to. So what challenges or mistakes that you see that company do, and do you have some advice how to avoid those mistakes and overcome those challenges?
Yeah, that is it's a tricky one because instead of having, really specifically prescribed, you have to do X, Y, and Z that was there before, as the scope and the breadth of the types of products, the types of therapies, as that's increasing, the regulators have to figure out how to broaden their guidance and their regulations without making it so vague that nobody knows what to do. So there's a lot more leeway to justify doing things that may not be, the same as it's always been, but the key there is you have to be able to justify it. So for companies, you can't just pick and choose and not have any justification. What the agencies want to see is that you fully understand your process, you have fully thought through whatever it is that you're working on with the process, the changes, setting it up. You need to be able to demonstrate and then later to defend um, and adjust as needed. You need to be prepared to do that for anything that's going on at your company. Is kind of the takeaway that I've seen there.
Mhm. And do you see companies that don't follow that path? And so, what are they doing instead? If you have some example, like of things you should not do.
Examples are just kind of cherry picking things that sound nice, and I don't have a great example off the top of my head. The best kind of analogy, or the one that comes up easiest to mind is with electronic systems implementation. So, if you say, okay, well, the regulatory bodies, they support CSA, they support computer or software assurance instead of the old kind of CSV model. But if you're doing that in the context where you don't have a good partnership with your vendor, like where your vendor's not doing the legwork to make sure that they have a reputable established process, and you do less testing, do less of your own kind of vetting out of that without really any justification, you could kind of get in trouble. That's sort of the first example that would come to my mind.
Right. So to really do the due diligence on the vendors that you're picking, and the risk analysis, and good audits to understand whether those vendors are a good fit. And probably what I hear a lot also from a lot of discussions that I do is also the human connections, which are very important, because sometimes you might find a good vendor on paper, but at the end you need to deal with people, right? So as you mentioned, sometimes clients come with regulatory issues, and the company needs to assist them, and they need to make sure that the pharma needs to ensure that the vendors have the people who can assist them in such situations, that they have experienced people who can jump on board and uh, give them the advice they need.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that is actually, I didn't mention it before. That's one of the roles at quality assurance. We might get a customer who has a question. They're in the middle of an audit with a regulatory agency, and they need backup data, or they need a procedure, or some kind of question that needs to be answered, and that's where we can kind of jump in real time and help them. And as someone who's hosted regulatory inspection, that is so valuable. It's so helpful just to have that peace of mind of knowing if I contact this supplier, they're going to respond to me in a timely manner. They're going to help me out, and they're going to provide what I need. So yeah, kind of to your point, the way that you choose your vendor matters. Your relationship with your vendor
Mhm.
matters. That's sort of a whole other side topic as far as the landscape and regulated industries. Like I mentioned with COVID and the supply chain disruptions, um, going along with that, we saw some less reputable vendors pop up, and as you get kind of desperate if you're running out, if your supplier for some kind of clean room garb, or even things like sterile isopropyl alcohol wipes, things like that. If you're trying to scramble to find alternate suppliers, you could end up with a bad supplier. So vendor management has become another sort of enforcement trend that's popping up and will continue to be more and more important as things get outsourced, or as more and more materials are required to come up with your finished product. But just like with digital systems, your vendor matters as much as the solution you're purchasing, and the support that you get from your vendor matters.
And if we are talking about asset management, so you mentioned that there are companies from a variety of spectrum that come to you, that some of them have some minimal system that they use, or they need something more advanced. So what is the biggest reason that companies actually come to you and either switch systems, or providers, or look for something new? So do they feel they are getting deviations, or do they feel they don't have the process under control? So what pushes companies to look for a more digitized solution?
Again, yeah, this could vary a lot depending on
Mhm.
sort of the maturity of the company. But yeah, to the point about if we're focusing on switching from paper-based to digital solutions, um, the biggest point there is digitalization. It's not a magic wand that will just completely eliminate all possible issues just by implementing that system. A bad electronic system or a poorly implemented electronic system is um, just as detrimental as a bad paper-based system. So with our customers, what we try to do is sort of not just shift their exact paper-based system onto a digital system, because that can be tricky, and also every system needs to be optimized, periodically. A paper-based system that was implemented 50 years ago might not be optimal before you don't want to just transfer that over. You want to take a hard look at it first. You want to optimize your processes, really get the right people in the room, think about what you want your process to look like, and then try to put that into your electronic system. And with Blue Mountain RAM, we do have a lot of flexibility in sort of how you can do that, because there are a lot of workflows, and you can just choose to implement them in a way that serves your needs best.
And so, do you feel it's also comes from that people feel they're spending too much time on manual labor, or do they encounter many deviations because of human errors with paper? So I know we don't like saying, okay, it's a human error, but at the end, human error, the root cause can be, what, the paper system doesn't really work. We need something electronic. So do you encounter this, that it actually, hinders the production because people are on paper or with a big system?
Absolutely. And I could go on for hours about how I personally have been impacted by those kinds of things. Yeah, I mean there are certain types of deviations, certain types of the human errors that can be completely eliminated. You're not going to have an illegible entry because somebody writes too small or because someone spills a cup of coffee onto a paper. Um, so you can completely eliminate those. It's more about just being mindful as you're implementing. But the paper-based systems, they are you can only improve the paper systems so much, and it's still going to rely a lot on, like you said, the manual interventions. And coming from sort of the background in root cause analysis, anytime you have a lot of processes that are really manual, or you have something where people just have to remember to do things a certain way, you're going to end up with a higher likelihood for error. And it's not because people don't care, it's not because they aren't doing their job, and sometimes it's not even because they aren't trained properly, it's because the system is not designed to prevent errors like that. And that's where the electronic systems, the benefits of electronic systems can really come into play.
So I can just imagine how you track maintenance or calibration of equipment if you just have to do it manually on the list, right? If you, I think the amount of errors or missed deadlines is just gigantic. So I know that when I used to go on audits, I always look at the calibration schedule to see if the maintenance was on time, and I've seen also with my eyes quite some occasions that people worked with uncalibrated system because they just didn't notice or didn't put, they didn't even remember to put a sticker, or even I've seen quite a lot of stickers on machines that say calibration pending, but usually it is because people are just behind their work, and the work just piles up because they don't have a good system to track what they need to maintain and to calibrate, and then everything just falls last minute, right? So this is a big issue, I assume.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much for the technician, for the ground level technicians to have to worry about from a day-to-day basis. Um, that it can the easier, it's a mutual benefit. You can make people's jobs easier, make their quality of life at work better, and you can also improve your compliance, because yeah, the missed schedules, that's absolutely an issue. There are companies who they come from using spreadsheets to going to fully digital systems. And as much as it is a real hurdle to kind of get people that work with it to mentally shift from the paper based to a digital system. But if it's done well, the benefits are enormous.
So what are your perspectives on how to choose the best vendors for the companies? So I know that we mentioned there should be good communication, and you should evaluate them, but how should you evaluate them? What would be your criteria when people evaluate their electronic vendor, especially?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and it doesn't just apply to digital solutions. The biggest strategy, or one of the biggest early indicators, is responsiveness and transparency. So is your vendor, your potential vendor, are they willing to talk to you? What kind of response times are you getting? What kind of um, level of documentation are they providing? Are they trying to withhold, or are they, transparent? Are they sharing what's going on? Because that becomes even more important as you start receiving the product or using the solution. That eventually there will be some kind of issue, or you will need something from them, and you need to know that they're there for you. And that's the expectation that the regulatory bodies have there too. There is a compliance aspect to having a good vendor. You can do research. You can go and find at least for some of the bad actors, it becomes pretty apparent as you just kind of go on and search and look about different vendors. You can find reviews. And we're in sort of the age of information where you can find out anything. You just need to have the right context to make sure that you're taking in the big picture. So yeah, biggest things: transparency, sense of urgency, and a sense of transparency.
And you mentioned before that there were occasions where your client just called during an audit. So is it happens quite a lot that auditors come and they want to speak with the vendors, or let's say the auditors ask questions which the client cannot answer, and they try to really quickly to reach you?
Yeah, generally it's not speaking directly to an agency. It's a question that they've gotten, and either they're unsure. Sometimes they just want confirmation that they're providing the right response. Um, or that a lot of times it'll be sort of a like the regulatory agencies. One of the common things that they'll do is ask you for objective evidence that if you say that their data will be backed up at a certain frequency, the regulators might say, okay, show me that evidence. And then at that point, if we provide that to them very quickly, it pretty much closes off that channel of investigation, of inquiry for the auditor, which again, if you're hosting the audit, you get to breathe a sigh of relief because that means they're satisfied. They can check off the box that says, yes, this system is a state of control. This vendor is appropriate and is supportive of the compliance needs.
And if we go back to your uh, career path, right? How would you compare working in pharma manufacturing in QC and QA to going to work for a role where your skills are still the same, but it's a, let's say, a startup or a software company? What are the differences in the job, in the culture?
It is the differences are vast. I mean, I've in both situations I've come across some incredibly smart, talented, skilled, compassionate, wonderful people in both industries. But just the biggest difference is I kind of have my brain back here. Um, Anyone who's ever worked in manufacturing, they know that you're kind of always anticipating a new issue to pop up. Some kind of some new problem, um, some investigation and out of specification, some issues that you have to deal with. And here I get a chance to sort of take a step back and I get to read everything, digest things, and then sort of use that information to help people. So for my personal inclinations and things that I like to do, it seems to be a much better fit. Um, but I'll never forget sort of what that manufacturing is like, and it's really it's an experience I would never want to give up. But I gotta say I'm really enjoying the software industry. The nature of what we do is it just provides a lot more flexibility for things like being able to work remotely and to do webinars like this. I mean, it's just I get a lot of different opportunities that um, I didn't even realize that I wanted before in the position I'm in now.
Right, it makes sense. So when you work in pharma, a lot of, especially in QA, a lot of from your job tasks involves putting out fires. Although
Yeah.
we always say it should be risk based. You should anticipate, but this is not the way. Always things go on. There are always deviations, and you need when you work in QA, you need to love putting out fires. You need to love the chaos that you usually have there.
Yes.
So I myself, as you, I was in the QC, I was in the QA, so I know that each of the departments has its own uh, pressure. So as a QA, when you work in the QC, it's more straightforward. You get your analysis, but then you need to be really quick, and oh yeah, you need to finish those and those tests, and because we need to release this batch, and you're staying hours just to complete the test. That some of them you need to wait for hours for some chemical reaction to happen. You need to continue, right? And in the QA, it's the same, but in terms of the paper trail, something happens, deviation in QC, deviation in the manufacturing, but they still want to release the batch. Then you need to quickly to analyze and assess the issue to see if the gravity of it, right? So it's a lot of it's quite chaotic. So I think people who love it, who love always to have adrenaline, this is the right place, right? And if you want to work at a bit more in your pace, uh, as you said, right, it's a good place to do something with those skills, but maybe not directly in pharma, I guess. So for me, it was quite similar in my shift as well, but it's a bit different. But I think you're to the point, and you're, I think, very happy with your situation, and because it really fits the family situation and less stress, I guess.
Yeah, that was very well put. And yeah, a lot of the learning, the early on kind of immersing myself in everything, it was a lot easier to do that before I had children. So yeah, that it can be, the chaos can be, kind of, you don't get bored when you're working in a manufacturing
No,
facility,
for
I will
sure
say that.
not.
And yeah, with QC, like you say, QC, even between QC and QA, I always used to say, QC finds the problems and then QA has to deal with them. So that was it's interesting to have those roles. And yeah, with quality assurance, in kind of the software industry, I get to be more of the kind of guiding, kind of helping, a guiding voice, instead of sort of a compliance officer like the police officer, or trying to, I don't have to be the bad guy as often when I'm here.
Yeah. So people actually are thankful for they are happy when the QA enters the office, let's say it like that, right?
Right. They don't cringe or roll their eyes and say, "Oh, QA is
Oh
here."
no, yeah, hide the notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's great. So Jennifer, is there anything else that you feel you would like to share about your career or asset management that we haven't discussed yet, but you feel it's important to share before we finalize this great session?
Um, I think I've said quite a bit already. I feel like you learned a lot about me. But my short takeaway version of sort of the advice is, learn everything you can about anything you can. Um, and this could work for anyone at any field or any stage of your career. And I guess the last part, if you were trying to, that I would want someone to know who's kind of aspiring to get into this field, is it's really easy to be intimidated kind of going into this field where there's such a vast body of knowledge. So the kind of secret I would want to share, or I would have wanted my younger self to know, is that no one truly knows what they're doing. And before, I know that sounds really alarming, before you question this entire conversation, let me clarify. I'm not saying that no one is qualified to be performing their roles in the industry. That's not the case. There are just countless throngs of experienced, dedicated professionals with a deep understanding of their current working knowledge that's considered to be best practice. And they work tirelessly on behalf of patient outcomes. But my point is just that knowledge is always changing, because continuous improvement is sort of your cost of entry to do business here. Um, and the message is mostly just to remember that even the experts don't know everything. Um, and we're all trying to figure this out together. So while the sort of ever raising standards that are in life sciences can be frustrating, because you're never going to be finished developing your understanding, it's also a good opportunity and kind of comforting to know that it's never a bad time to kind of jump into this game and start learning. Because, and as older expectations and best practices are replaced by the newest, the current ones, once we get new information, more and more you'll start to notice that your knowledge, your opinions, they can stack up with the rest of them. So I guess the message there is just there's never a bad time to start learning more about it, because eventually you're going to catch up just with the nature of how things continuously improve in this industry.
Thank you for coming to the show. It was a pleasure having this chat with you.
I really appreciated the conversation. And like everything, I think I learned something just from talking to you. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Qualitalks podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star review. If you want to learn more about GMP, please visit us at www.qualistery.com. Stay compliant and see you at the next one.